Hello, punters. Welcome to episode 4 of The Outside Fence. Big surprise we've got this far. I'm joined by my Melbourne racing expert, Stewart Bowles-Brown. And Bowles, they were talking wheelbarrows and Armaguard trucks for you on the weekend. So I hope you're all pumped for tonight's episode.
I'm looking forward to having a look through a few of these races. I didn't see them too bad, which is the main thing. But after we get over the weekend, we'll be on to next week, so you can't get too far ahead of yourself in this game.
There's nothing better than reviewing a meeting when all you see is dollar signs all over the screen. So we'll get stuck into this one from Caulfield. We had a heavy track to play with by the end of the day. How did the track handle all the rain we had?
Wasn't too much of an issue. The track started off on a soft 6 in the morning, but as you mentioned, there was expected rain through the day. So the fact that there was a downgrade or multiple downgrades through the day did not come as a surprise. It eventually got into the heavy 8 range after race 6, but it played sort of fairly wet all day. As far as a pattern went, it was typical Caulfield when the rain comes through in the day. They tended to get away from the inside progressively as the day went on. By about race 3, it was fairly evident that the fence was a no-go zone, and most of the jockeys were aware of that and sort of steered away. And particularly in the last 2 races in the day, they really got out into the wider lanes, sort of swooping home down the middle, and that was sort of the place to be.
Okay, there was one horse that was absolutely loving all the rain in his box before the race, and that was in the main race that we're going to start off with here, the Group 3 Sir John Monash Stakes, which was race 7. The horse I'm talking about, I'm sure everyone's well aware of, Jungle Edge, one of the best wet trackers in Australia. And Balls, you managed to find this one nice and early. Was this just a matter of, here comes the rain, let's back Jungle Edge?
It was a bit. It was also sort of a field that was right up to his level. So it was a very winnable race for him. Then when you throw in the track sort of getting towards a heavy range, it was a very easy horse to find. Bookmakers did have him at around the $4.80 mark in the morning, but that was soon snapped up considering everyone was aware that the rain was coming. And it ended up starting pretty much a 6-4 favourite in the race, $2.50. So it was very heavily backed, as is the case generally when it goes round and the rain hits. The early favourite was Viridine from the Godolphin stable, and it was sort of fairly easy in the market given the support for Jungle Edge.
All right, we'll go and have a look at the replay now. Interesting point here was Tavidance was going to be ridden with cover. That went out the window after about 10 metres. What's the story there?
It did. It's a very fast horse out of the gates. It's in the white colours there, and so I'd expect most people would have had it down as a leader in the race pre that announcement of tactics, where they were going to look for cover. However, that didn't eventuate in the end. The horse just jumped too well, and as you can see, it's a fairly keen-going type. The eventual winner, Jungle Edge, is outside him now. And then you've got the main danger in the Godolphin Blue sitting just behind Jungle Edge, which is Viridine. Now, as they come up towards the turn here, Jungle Edge looks to have Tavidance covered, but the main danger is right on his back there and ready to peel off outside him and give him a run for his money. But as you can see, Viridine gets off his back about now. But Jungle Edge kicks in, and being the superior wet tracker he is, it was never really in doubt from about this point. Another one of the eye-catching runs in the race was from I Am Someone, that horse getting down the outside into 3rd position now. It ran last week, so it was on the 7-day backup. But I think coming back in distance from 1,200 to 1,100 metres was in its favour. Plus, it doesn't mind a bit of cut in the track, which it got there. And also, it's sort of a better horse ridden with a bit of cover like it was then, whereas the week before it got a bit keen on speed in the 1,200 and didn't really finish off as you'd like. So it was sort of a much improved run in the race, and that's the sort of setup it likes.
Okay, cool. So, to me, this strikes me as a race where it's pretty simple and it's hard to take a lot moving forward, considering we don't get a lot of heavy tracks as we... Well, it's winter, but we don't get a huge amount of heavy tracks as we look forward towards the spring, and if we do, well, we just sort of default to Jungle Edge anyway. Is it as simple as just, wow, that's the race move on, or is there another horse we can sort of look at out of the race maybe to follow under different circumstances?
It is a bit. A lot of these horses have reached their mark, so you sort of know what you're going to get with them each race. There's not a huge amount of improvement in them. There is one horse that did run in the race called Intuition, which is a recent acquisition to the Kurt Goldman stable. It's had 2 runs for him now. Now, it was an eye-catching run at Flemington. Its first run ran some of the best sectionals of the day, and it's run some of the best sectionals of the race again here. Now, it's probably not up to this level, and is running those sectionals sort of sitting back, being ridden quietly and being allowed to finish off. But if you can get back in grade and find sort of a race over, say, even up to 1,400 metres, it's sort of a horse that could be winning soon.
Okay, nice. We'll keep an eye out for Intuition. Looking towards the Bletchingley, is this form you think will hold up in the Bletchingley, or maybe we look for some fresh blood?
Yeah, well, so the Bletchingley's on in 2 weeks at Caulfield over 1,200 metres. It's generally the follow-on race to this, so I'd expect most of these to head that way. Now, obviously, if it's a heavy track again, Jungle Edge is obviously going to be at front of mind and be very hard to beat in it. However, if they get dry conditions, I'd be tending to steer away from him. And I would like to look for some fresh blood. I don't think it was the strongest Monash I've ever seen in my life. So the Bletchingley generally gets a better field. It's sort of obviously 2 weeks closer to spring, gets a few of the better horses possibly resuming it. So without knowing who's going there, it'd be a race where I'm leaning towards finding some fresh blood.
Okay, cool. Well, it's going to be a bit of a common theme on the show today is we're looking at some of these wet track results that don't tell us a whole lot moving forward. The next race we're going to look at is race 3. Now, this is a horse that ran a pretty clear favourite, Tavidance, and that was how the race played out. It won quite convincingly in the end. Did you find Tavidance balls?
I didn't, which I was a bit annoyed with myself after the race, as going into the race, I had no doubt it was the best horse. However, I thought 1,400 metres second up might have been a bit short for it.
Did it resume at 1,400?
It resumed at 1,300, Sandy. Okay. So it was only up that 100 metres in distance. As you can see, we're at the replay here. It's the horse that's in sort of 5th spot now in the blue and white colours, one off the fence. That was the first surprise in the race. So I didn't expect it probably to settle that close. And sort of once it did, that was a big sign that this horse is going to be very hard to beat.
You're starting to feel sick here, aren't you?
I am a little bit, considering one of my bets was Sonnery, and there it is 3 deep on speed. And one of my other bets was Kaplumpich, which is 4 wide out the back there. So it wasn't a great watch for me. But actually went at a fast tempo here, as you can see. There was sort of lines of 3 throughout. Music Edition was a bit of a surprise leader on the inside there. He's actually a bit of a pest of a horse of mine. You're not sure what his racing style is going to be week to week, and he can sort of throw a spanner in the works every now and then. But as you say, they come around the turn in. Jamie Carr's got Tavidance in a lovely spot, gets it out into the clear, and once she got it in the clear, it was pretty much curtains for everything else.
Yeah, now, he was always going to be the strongest to the line by the sound of things.
Yeah, settling that close and having clear running was sort of the key to it winning the race. Now, the horses behind, they're all sort of, this is pretty much their level. They're sort of, this is a lesser race on the Saturday or midweek horses. There's a few honest types there, but there's no real superstars. So as far as I'm concerned, Tavidance is clearly the best horse in this race, and it is probably the horse out of the meeting that I'd look to follow. Because as mentioned before, it was only at 1,400 here, and it's shown good form over sort of 16 at 1,800, and I'd have no doubt 2,000 metres would be in its grasp as well. And sort of I can see keep on winning and going through the classes, and turn into even a minor stakes horse. It looks a fairly promising type.
Okay, sort of an early spring style race. You think that's sort of its level, Tavidance, or still a bit untapped?
I think it would probably get there in time. As far as sort of it's up at this time of the year, it's had 2 runs, so to get to the spring might be a bit of a long prep. So I'm not sure what Mick Price will do with it. He might want to keep racing it through the grades here to get its rating up, so he can possibly have a crack at some of the better races. But the horse is definitely one to follow over the coming weeks. If it's sort of racing, I would assume it'd go to a mile race next time out.
Okay, excellent. Anything behind we can possibly follow in this grade, or potentially a little bit weaker?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I had something on a horse called Kaplumpich. It hasn't won this prep, but it's been ever so consistent. And it just had no luck at all on Saturday. It was 4 wide, no cover, well back, and still ran fairly well. Take out the winner, it wasn't beaten that far by the rest of them. It sort of loomed to win last start over the mile, or the start previous over the mile, and probably didn't quite run it out. So if you can find a similar race to this, sort of at 1,1500, that sort of benchmark 78 grade, or even come back to the midweeks, it's probably a horse you can back. I suppose the only little wary thing you could be with it, it has had a long prep already, and it has had a few chances. You probably wouldn't want to take short odds about it, but if you can find a race where it maps well and is not a bad price, it's probably worth having something on.
Okay, excellent. We're going to jump over to race 4 now, which is the Ned Same Race Multi handicap. Good luck to you if you can get on with the Same Race Multi. You can have a bit of a head wobble here, Balls, but judging by the betting, I reckon there was a lot of head wobbling after this event, with the winner, Travimyfriend, who just continued to firm all day. Now, is this a sort of a jungle edge scenario onto the wet ground and home he goes?
It was a bit like he does like wet ground, Travimyfriend, but another big part of why I like the horse was the start previous. It was over sort of pretty much 1,440 at Caulfield, so pretty much the same distance, and it was pretty much given no chance in the run. It was ridden very passively and sort of settled out the back, when usually its best runs have been sort of sitting close to the speed. And it actually ran pretty well, considering like its late sectionals were okay, and for this type of race it looked well in. But as you can see here, Dean Yendall went on this occasion, and he's got it out nicely out of the gates and found a beautiful spot for it. It's there sort of in 5th position now in sort of the blue colours with the yellow cap. As you can see, Reflectivity is the leader, Super Hard's outside, and Battle Talk's going up 3 deep. And Travimyfriend is going to get a lovely spot just tracking up just behind them. Probably the major talking point out of the race is the favourite, Morrissey. It's back sort of second last with the red cap there on the outside. Now, I actually mapped the horse to be leading in this race, and it won the race that Travimyfriend contested last start by sitting outside the leader. And most people would have had it sort of either leading or outside the leader type position. However, it did settle back, and once it was back there, it was sort of hard to see how it was going to win. But as you say, they come into the straight here, and Travimyfriend's had that beautiful run. Yendall just peels it to the outside, and it's pretty much got them all covered within a few strides. And for those of us on the horse, it was a very easy watch these last sort of 200 metres, as there were no real chases, and it had the horse on its inside beaten easily.
Yeah, that's an interesting one with Morrissey. There was plenty in the Stewart's report afterwards, but I get the feeling when they call Craig Williams in, he's always going to talk his way out of trouble. He did mention that he wanted to go back because of that wide gate. Not something I'm usually a fan of, but I guess at least he makes a decision, Williams.
I think, his reasoning more was that he sort of came out, and obviously he wasn't sort of express urgent on it or anything, but he saw a few inside him that wanted to be a bit positive, and he thought, if I go forward here, I'm a high chance of getting caught wide. My best chance is to sort of come back a bit, and I suppose ride him a bit quieter. Now, that's probably a legitimate excuse. Like, obviously, I don't think there's anything integrity-wise that there's any issue with the ride, but it's understandable if punters did back the horse, probably expecting it to settle in the first 2, they'd be a bit disappointed with the ride, but I suppose you just have to take that at some stages.
That is racing. Sometimes that happens. Now, a horse you pointed out sitting up outside the leader, Super Hard. My limited knowledge of Super Hard, I don't usually see him in that position. Is that a fair call?
Yeah, that's true. And even at 1,400 metres, I don't think it's his best distance. To me, Super Hard can be forgiven for the run on Saturday, I thought it was the wrong race for it, and also not ridden to advantage. Super Hard's best runs are ridden nice and cold over 1,000, 1,200 metres with the speed on. It's got an unbelievable sharp turn of foot that it can use to advantage. Not that sort of sitting outside the leader, doing a bit of work and probably hitting the front too soon type thing. So Super Hard, I'd just forgive it from there. It's now gone to the Lindsay Smith stable, so obviously a good stable to follow. And if you do see it sort of in 1,000, 1,200 metre race with a speed on, and it's likely to get a nice run sort of back off the speed, it's probably a horse you can forgive on Saturday.
Okay, that sort of ties in with my takeaway last week too, when we were talking about horses with soft runs, and then when they're up exposed facing the breeze, they don't perform the same way. So he could be one to follow this. Super Hard. That's the 3 races we're going to cover in this show from Caulfield. The only other horse I wanted to briefly mention, how did a Kiwi come over here, run on a heavy track and go around $14? That horse, Lord Boozeron, or whatever it's called in the staying race. How did no one find that one?
I suppose it hadn't run for a while, so I suppose it had that gap between runs. Obviously, they'd shut down racing in New Zealand for a while because of COVID-19. I suppose, its fitness levels may have been queried, but and I suppose its form is a bit unknown over here. Plus, there's a healthy spruik on the 2 favourites in that race, Grand Flora and Thought of That, who pretty much dominated the market. Now that was a race that I wasn't keen on at all, because I sort of had queries over the 2 favourites, and as I say, I didn't know much about Lord Boozeron, and the rest of them didn't really enthuse me too much. But yeah, I must say, when the horse kicked sort of 3 or 4 lengths clear in the straight, I was cursing myself a little bit for just not having something on it, given I didn't sort of rate the rest of the field, and it sort of had a bit of scope to it.
Yeah, it went like bloody might and power. Thought of that. What has happened to that horse? It looked really promising in the spring last year. Never really returned to those heights.
No, it's interesting. Obviously, it won the Norman Robinson very impressively, and then failed in the Derby on a wet track, and the wet track was given as a reason for the failure, plus possibly because it didn't lead and sort of control the race, which seems to be its go. It came back in the autumn and was very sluggish in its runs, and they were very much poor runs. It was very sluggish and wouldn't sort of get going, and had to work hard to sort of find its spot, which to me is a bad sign for a horse, and not really a horse I want to be finding. And to be honest, the same things really happened this time. In first up, he did run second, but it was on that sort of mad leaders track day at Caulfield where he did lead, but he had to be pushed right out to lead. And then again on Saturday, he was outside the leader, and had to work a bit to get there. But he was sort of a spent force by the turn. Once again, they might sort of blame the wet track for the failure, but Thought of That is definitely a horse I don't want to be finding in any kind of race at the moment.
Very fair call. Okay, we're going to hit the question segment of the show. Thanks again to everyone who sent in the questions. We haven't answered them all on here because they're not all entirely genuine. But Leroy is back with another question this week. Thank you, Leroy. Balls, what impact do weights have on your punting? People used to carry on like they were the most important thing, and now not so much. Before I throw it to you, Balls, I think one thing about weights is basically, before we had all these sectional times, and even back before replays, weights was basically all we had. This is back in the days of, if you've ever read any of Don Scott's books, and there's always that 1.5 kilos to a length type formula. We've moved on from weights because we've got more information.
That's probably a very good point that we probably have. Personally, my importance on weights has lessened a lot over the last few years. Obviously, when I first sort of got into racing, I was probably from the same school of thought as yourself. I was sort of bit of a weights and measures man, I suppose they call them. Now, I sort of take note of weights and weight swings and things like that, but I'm not incorporating them as a huge factor in my form. To be honest, I'm mainly only interested, say, in significant weight swings between horses, or significant rises in weight or drops in weight, sort of around that 5-6 kilo mark. Now, I don't have any science why there's 5 or 6 kilo. It's just more an arbitrary number that I've came up with. and I tend to think sort of weights matter more the longer the race is. So, for instance, say a Melbourne Cup or a sort of 2,400 metre plus race, then I think weights do have sort of more importance than they would in the sprint race for obvious reasons. They've got to carry it for a longer distance, and most horses will be fatigued at the end of a sort of 3,200 or 2,400 metre race as it is. So I suppose every little advantage you have can come into it. The other time where I suppose weights I'd tend to pay some notice to say on very heavy tracks. If you can get those sort of bottom weights that they throw an apprentice on and claim sort of right down below the minimum, generally that can be a bit of an advantage. And you will find that those horses a lot of the time are well backed by the market purely on that factor alone.
Okay, what about... there's a horse at Caulfield that we didn't touch on, Mystery Shot, and it was a horse that rose significantly in weight. Is there anything we can draw from that race to maybe discuss the weights a bit further? Yeah,
well, I suppose this is more an example than any sort of hard and fast evidence. It's obviously the sample size is very small. But yeah, race 5 at Caulfield on Saturday, Mystery Shot and Scorpius had met each other 2 weeks ago at Caulfield. And Mystery Shot had beaten home Scorpius by about 2 lengths on that occasion. And now when they're meeting on Saturday, Scorpius meets at 6 kilos better. And as people who would have seen the race would be aware, Mystery Shot beat it easily again by even further. Now, I suppose something of interest would be the SPs, respective SPs from those runs for these horses. When they met the first time at Caulfield, Mystery Shot was a $3.30 chance and Scorpius was a $5 chance. Now, as mentioned before, Mystery Shot beat it by a couple of lengths, beat it on its merits. Now, on Saturday and Scorpius, there is that 6 kilo swing around, and Scorpius actually starts a slight favourite ahead of Mystery Shot. Now, as mentioned, Mystery Shot wins easily. So those changes in pricing or the change in favouritism and bringing the prices together, I'd have no doubt there's some bit of factoring in there of that weight swing, whether it be by like true pros or whether it's enough that the media team seem to mention that factor a lot, and it's just a fair bit of recreational money that's sort of thrown in there as well.
That's a good point, actually, to think about the weights. When we think about these different factors, it's not necessarily the result of the race. It's also worth just noting what effect it can have on the market. Now, I know Michael Rodd came out and said Mystery Shot improved significantly from its last start to this start, so whether that improvement was enough to overcome that weight swing is no one's ever really going to know, but just that point you talk about with the SPs, be on high alert, Leroy, that when there's a big weight swing, the market will still pick up on that fact.
Well, it's just, even if you're not using it, I suppose, specifically to back that horse or back against that certain horse, you can use it to help you know which way the market might go, which helps you obviously make your betting decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got one from one of the luminaries on Twitter, Marco B. Whose ride from Barrier 1 was better, Jamie Mott on Bedford or D. Perez on Up Cups in the 2016 Hobart Cup? I assume you meant Hobart Cup. We did a bit of research here, Marco, and Up Cups didn't start from Barrier 1 at all, so we could have thrown this in the bin, but I think it's worth looking at Bedford and Bedford's race.
Set to go. 1700 Signal and racing immediately. Jumped in a pretty good line. Francis Boy goes straight to the lead with Surreal Image. Pizzo from the deep, then He Excels, who gets up to fourth from Pure Scott. Lord Durante, Dogmatic declares war. 3 further back, Eureka Street, Curra, Triple Strip and Bedford last. 1400 out, Francis Boy led Surreal Image. He Excels box seats third, followed by Pizzo. 2 lengths, Pure Scott, 2.5, Lord Durante. A length declares war, Dogmatic well back with Bedford, Eureka Street, Triple Strip and
pretty much third, fourth last in those sort of red colours on the inside.
Along here as they run off the back at the 1,000 metres. They're going like scalded cats.
Generally,
6 lengths in front, 7 lengths in front of Pizzo, and he excels. 2.5 Pure Scott, 3 lengths Lord Durante declares war. Then Dogmatic, Bedford's a long way back with Triple Strip, Eureka Street and Curra. Francis Boy and Surreal Image at each other's throats. 800 metres to go, let 8 lengths. 2 in third, he excels, followed by Pizzo. 2 lengths to Pure Scott, Lord Durante. Then came Dogmatic, who's just starting to make some progress. Triple Strip has its back from Bedford, declares war, Eureka Street and Curra. Coming up towards the turn, Francis Boy's been annoyed by Surreal Image up towards the corner.
At the 454 lengths down, he excels into that margin. Dogmatic runs on. Then Bedford, Lord Durante, he's obviously getting through the ground okay. And now once he gets into the straight, he sees an opportunity to come out to the middle of the track where the sort of better lanes are and finish off his race.
The outside, Surreal Image at the 200, grabbed by He Excels, and now Bedford takes the lead from He Excels. Lord Durante runs on. Bedford in the shadows, coming clear in the gloom at Caulfield, and Bedford will win. 3/4 Lord Durante, 3 lengths Dogmatic, He Excels, then Eureka Street, Triple Strip, then Surreal Image and Francis Boy. No surprises, got tired. A gap Curra, Pure Scott, declares war, and Pizzo.
Marco B had a little something on that as well. We've got one more question from one of the great trolls on Twitter, Joe Brown. But this is actually quite a good question. Putting to one side track bias, can you give us a couple of things to look for if you are a rookie punter at the tab on a Saturday? Wins at the track or the distance or conditions, jockey trainer combos, or something a tad more advanced than that. Hashtag mug punter, hashtag TAB rat. So stay tuned to Humans of the Tab on Twitter, because we might see Joe pop up there on the weekend. That's a pretty fair call, Balls. If you're not balls deep into the form, so to speak, maybe there's a couple of quick things to look at to give you something to cheer on. Do you have any particular advice?
It's obviously, if you are time poor and you're sort of just going to the tab and looking for a bet, I suppose, as mentioned there, things like performances at the track can be a big thing, because obviously from track to track there's a lot of different variables about each track, but if you've got form at a certain track, it obviously is a big tick for the horse. Another thing, obviously, particularly in wet conditions, if there are wet conditions there, if the horse handles a heavy track or a soft track, then that's obviously important. And then you probably can't beat top jockeys, top trainers, that sort of thing. Obviously, the market's sort of greatly affected by those factors, so there's probably not a huge amount of juice there for you. But if you're just sort of trying to find a winner, it's probably not the worst way to go.
Yeah, I'll echo those thoughts. One of my favourites, this probably stems from my love of Regal Roller. Track and distance, horses that perform well at track and distance is always something I'm on red alert for, especially like a specialist Caulfield 1400, something like that. So if they've done it over those under those conditions before, Joe, feel free to follow up on them again. I would still say that the market doesn't factor in jockeys probably as much as it should on occasion, so feel free to follow a good jockey, and if all else fails, just find one firm on Betfair and go with the market. I think that's going to hold you in good stead. But thanks to everyone who has been sending in questions. We are going to move on to takeaway of the week, Balls. I might let you kick this one off.
Yep. So, mine sort of relates, I suppose, to the Caulfield meeting a bit on Saturday. It's more to do, I suppose, if you're reviewing that meeting or looking back on it, and particularly looking at, say, the times and sectionals of the meeting. Now, obviously, the track started off a soft 6, and then by the end of the day, it was a heavy 8 or even maybe a touch worse. You've got to be very important if you're looking at sort of overall times from the meeting, comparing sort of race to race, comparing sort of last, say, 6, 4 and 200 metre sectionals between horses from different races and things like that, because obviously those who raced earlier in the day have got the best of the conditions, whereas those racing late in the day obviously have the worst of the conditions. So personally, if I'm reviewing that meeting, I'm not as sort of into the times and sectionals as I would be sort of on a consistent track throughout the day. It's still worth looking at them though, purely because obviously you know yourself that the track was at its best at the start of the day and has deteriorated through the day. So if you find a performance that ranks fairly high on the day in a later race, sort of times-wise, obviously you can elevate that horse a fair bit because it's done it. It's done something really good in adverse conditions compared to horses who had sort of the best of the conditions as well. So I suppose you can just look for those sort of superior performances, particularly late in the day. But I wouldn't go sort of too hard and fast into to all the times on the day, given the factors that are at play.
Very good. Just reinforcing that point there, the race 2, the benchmark 90 mares race over 1100, that winner Al Campana, and just touched off Miss Iano. They ran very comparable time to the Sir Monash, which was race 7. They went out, I think, Jungle Edge, I think they went out a length quicker in the Sir John Monash and came home. Pretty identical times for the last 600 metres. So looking at raw figures, you might line up those races pretty closely, but obviously the track was deteriorating through the day, so you've got to keep that in mind. Very good balls. My takeaway for the week, this is more of a bit of a general thing in terms of patience in your betting and treating each race on its merits, one ball at a time is the good old cliche. This is something I've been a bit aware of lately. It's so easy to fall into a bit of a rut when you just end up betting a similar amount on every sort of race that you look at, and I think that's a definite no-no to go into. A massive edge we have as punters is the ability to pick and choose our spots. In fact, the old saying that a good punter will always beat a good bookmaker is based on exactly that reason, that the punter can choose, the bookmaker's always got to go up. So your edge is different on every race you encounter, and to be as good a punter as you can, I think you need to be able to recognise when you have a big edge and take advantage, and on the flip side you need to recognise when you don't have any edge and wait for the next race. This is something that I really struggle with. That's always something I'm always mindful of, and the same goes with your staking as well. There's no point having the same on your best bet as what you end up having on some flukers hoping to get out stakes. You're only going to end up one way if you're doing that. So you need to know when to push, when to hold back, when to shoulder arms. The very best punters are very good at that, and I think that's something we all need to constantly work towards as we try and improve our own punting. I know you have fallen in the trap of betting too many races balls. I've heard you blow up about that before, so is that something you're always constantly thinking about?
It is, yeah. A lot of the time you find, or personally I've found, if I do the form for a race, I almost feel obliged to bet because I've spent that time doing the form. But yeah, it can be you're better off just do the form. You don't really come up with anything, or you don't feel there's any sort of overs in the market, and just sort of shouldering arms and moving on to the next race can be one of the best things you can do.
That's a good point. Even if you've done the form, you don't have a bet, you haven't lost. It's not a waste of time. It's still going to be in the back of your mind what you've assessed that race and what happens, and that can help you moving forward. And don't forget, these days with Betfair, you have the option. If you don't find anything you want to back, you might find something you want to lay. You might find a situation you could take advantage of in play. So just be aware of everything. And but if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. You just leave it alone, move on to the next race. Speaking of moving on to the next race, we are going to move on to the next meeting this week. We're going back to Flemington. What have we got ahead of us there, Balls?
Yeah, so back to Flemington. Obviously, we raced there 2 weeks ago with finals day. I've had a quick peek at the weather for the upcoming week in Melbourne. It looks fairly fine, so I'd expect at least a dryish track. for Flemington. And as I mentioned before, I'd expect there'd be a fair few horses that ran 2 weeks ago, running again this week. So a lot of that form might filter through. Again, a couple of horses that we did mention on the show, or we have mentioned a few times on the show now. The 800 metre 2-year-old race, I would say Alcy 1 and Johnny Angry will both run. They're both in the noms. And there's also a 2,800 metre race with Lord Belvedere and our Farris meeting again. As of note, as we mentioned sort of last time with Chapada in that same race, he might be sort of ready for a spill. He's not nominated now, so maybe he's been given a little break.
Beautiful. I look forward to those 2 races in particular. Balls, thanks again for your time. That's going to wrap up the show. Look forward to seeing you next week. Hopefully you've had another good weekend on the punt. Thanks to everyone for watching. If you do like the show, give us a like, give us a subscribe here on YouTube. Give us some love on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who lets us know you've been watching and all the great feedback so far. So until next week, good luck on the punt and see you then. Cheers, Balls.
Thanks, Hef.